I hereby open this meeting, joint hearing for the planning board, 6 o'clock on April 22nd.
Now I'll open the city council. Do I have a motion to open?
Motion.
Second. So moved. All in favor?
Aye.
We don't motion to open.
Oh, we do. Yeah.
All right. So I guess there's no one here. I'm not going to bother asking. There's only one item on the agenda.
Yeah.
So let's just dive into it.
Yep.
Do you guys want to lead off and tell us what?
So I can tell you, since I'm the one that brought this forward, we had an issue, as you guys know, with the zoning board of appeals being approached by the mobile station and the interpretation of the sign ordinance. And in the beginning, I worked on the sign ordinance for a long period of time. It was a arduous, collaborative process. And this was one of the pieces that I felt should have been in there and was not. It was voted, basically we voted it down on a few different levels, LED signs in general. So since the mobile station was allowed to put up a digital sign and the world didn't end, I thought it would make sense for us to have some parameters if other gas stations wanted to do the same thing. So, they weren't all over the place, and there didn't have to be a long, drawn-out process every time it needed to happen. So it could be streamlined. And if we have parameters for it, then probably better than not. So this is what we came up with.
Okay.
And it's basically adding to the definitions to have LED sign placed there, which is a sign that displays the price cost of a fuel product. So if it was electricity, it could say a kilowatt per hour. And if it was hydrogen, whatever, it's a fuel. So we're not specifying what type of fuel, we're just saying fuel.
Okay.
And then we'd have to reorder the letters accordingly. So we would have in section L, we'd have service station LED sign, which basically is the same as the definition. And the criteria under that would be a permanent ground-mounted sign for use by only fuel service stations for the purpose of advertising fuel costs. That's the allowed purpose. And you'll notice that we say ground-mounted because we specifically didn't want to say that awning-mounted were okay. We felt like it'd be better on a sign than there is a practice of mounting them on the awning. Mm-hmm. We thought it would look better if
so that's not allowed in this case.
So it's not allowed.
Okay. Can I ask a question? Yeah. I definitely want you to continue, but just in case I lose this, because it's been that kind of day. It says that it's for the purpose of advertising fuel costs. A digital sign, if I understand correctly, it could have multiple content on it. It could be a ticker. It could
right.
flip screens. So if, for instance, they did in fact show fuel pricing, but then went to drink our coffee cup or something, do you care?
That
as
would,
long as at some point it does fuel, that's okay?
No, that would be a prohibited use under this ordinance. Basically, this is to allow for just numerals to be displayed.
Okay.
There would be no flashing messages, no rotating screens, no scrolling screens. That would be a different type of sign.
Okay, so is this LED?
This is straight
digital
and that's where the next part is. LED numerals may not exceed 16 inches in height, and the signs may be double-sided. So.
It's missing a D, may double-sided.
May be. Oh, I have it on mine.
Yeah, we're missing.
That must be an older version.
Okay, yeah.
You have it, right? Okay.
I have it.
Okay.
Good, just checking.
Very good. Yay.
Let it be.
But I didn't change that 12 though. So, all LED numerals shall be of any color. Now, the reason is a lot of places limit them to green or amber or whatever. We didn't care. If you can get a red one cheaper than you can get a yellow one, then
okay.
It's not that big of a difference. They come in all different colors. So if you do an inventory of different signs, you'll see some are red, some are green, some are orangish, and those are like the main. Now this is the part that can be a little confusing. So illumination. The sign must not exceed the maximum illumination of 0.8 foot candles between dawn to dusk, and 0.5 foot candles from dusk to dawn, as measured from the sign surface at maximum brightness. Such signs may not display light of such intensity or brilliance to cause glare or otherwise impair the vision of the passing driver. Now, you can probably wonder what is a foot candle and how does it measure. And so the answer to that question is actually on that sheet that you have.
Before we, okay, can I just suggest the word soul in between the and purpose?
Yes. And which section?
A. It's just a suggestion. The word soul is
Sole use only by field service.
for the soul.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. So, which I think clarifies what your question is.
Yeah. I managed to, after thinking about it, get it down to one word.
Yeah.
Okay, now foot candles. Where?
Okay. So if you look in there, and I don't have my. I'll look at this one.
Oh, sorry, there's more copies.
Okay. So this is kind of a service bulletin from the manufacturers of LED signs.
Okay.
And it's talking about basically measuring and ensuring appropriate brightness for LED signs, which would include conservation of energy, increased life expectancy of electronic display components, building goodwill with the community, increasing the legibility of the display. Because if it's too bright, it's gonna get blurry. You're not gonna be able to see it properly. Now there's different technologies. You have manual dimming, scheduled dimming, photocell technology. So some of these are automatic. So it might have a photocell, so as it gets dark, it changes the brightness. When it's full sun, it changes the brightness. Yeah, was that lightning? Okay. Now, if you look on the back page here, or the middle page, I guess, it talks about research that was done around brightness. And a foot candle, FC, meter described below is used to determine whether electronic display is compliant. Foot candle measurements are taken when the sign is displaying all white, maximum brightness, and then taken again with the sign switched off. These measurements are taken at a distance of 100 feet perpendicular to the display. The difference between these measurements is then compared with the eye luminance limit column table 1. The difference then equal to the eye luminance limit for the particular light zone where the display is located, then the display conforms to appropriate brightness level. And then what it does is it talks about the different levels in table 1 of light. So low ambient electric light, which would be, for you when you're looking at it, it looks fairly dim, would be 0.3. Okay. And medium ambient electric light would be 0.8. So you see in here, we went just a little bit above the lowest ambient light. So and then we set the top at medium ambient electric light, which is what's recommended.
Okay.
Now, how do you measure it? Well, there's a couple ways. You can measure lux or you can measure foot candle. If you measure lux, it's a really expensive machine, really costly. But to measure foot candle, all you need is a inexpensive measurement device. And now, would we expect our compliance officers to get this necessarily? I don't exactly. I think it's $100 roughly. I think maybe they might have to get one if there's ever a question.
I would think,
And we don't necessarily need to spend that $100. But using foot candle, $100 is a lot cheaper than the $3,000 it would cost if we measured it in lux. And this right here is basically the industry standard for what the illuminance should be, which is why we decided to use it.
Could you? I'm sorry, you might have had something. Could you request that as part of this, anyone that does it prepares a statement from a third party with measurement?
That could be something that.
I only say that because
I'm
it
fine
takes
with
the
it.
liability off of our side entirely and just makes it as part of the, yes, you can do this, but you have to have it.
No, I'm thinking they need to get a special permit for this, right, Jessica?
It depends. I mean, if it's
My only question-
compliant, they can just go through the
They can
building
just-
inspector.
building
And
inspector.
It doesn't, I mean, planning board rarely ever addresses signs. If there's ever a signage special permit, it goes to the ZBA.
Right. So should we?
And
Does it
I'm
make
not
sense
putting
for
a
us
barrier
to-
up that's unnecessary. I'm
Right.
just tossing it
My
out.
Does it
question is
make-
if they did a third party, could it be adjusted afterwards? Basically making the third party.
Irrelevant. It would
Oh, right. That's true because these are all like when they have it
Yeah.
measured, they turn it
Yeah, it's like, all right,
within the
third party.
parameters.
There you
All right,
go.
who's going to enforce this thing? Don't tell me the building inspector, please.
Well, I don't think anybody's necessarily going to enforce it. I think that they're just going to get a permit and put it up, And we're gonna if it's really egregious and offensive, then we have an ordinance to go back to, But honestly, I don't think anybody's going to enforce it. But at least if there is ever a question, we have clarity.
I'd like to add that when we were initially talking about this, because LED lights are such a new form of light compared to a lot of the pre-existing lights from electricity and everything, and I know LED, but you know what I'm saying. What I really liked about this is that it provides a standardized measure. So in the future, if we continue to have more technological advances in how you have street signs or these luminescent signs, we at least have a standardized measure on how to determine whether or not we would want them in East Hampton.
You know, it's too bad we're just gonna do it for the whole city. I mean, you got like a downtown and have it so much, and then they go, as soon as you got on Route 10,
Yeah.
and that would be so much. You don't have like a, you know,
Consistency.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely.
Well, I mean, the good thing about this is if so say in my district on Northampton Street, the gas station, which is buried in a neighborhood, wants to do this, and then the neighbors are really upset that all of a sudden they feel like it's too bright. Well, when they are upset about that, then they can come back and they can look, well, does it meet these standards? And then the proof of the burden hopefully would be on the sign owner to say, yeah, it conforms. But, I'm not opposed to adding something that says that they at least have to have paperwork that says what the sign illuminations boundaries are, so if you're putting one up that is going to blow everybody out of the water, we would know it from the beginning.
Yeah.
exactly.
So I don't have a problem with that.
I think that seems like a good idea, although I don't know what agency, third party, would do something like
Well,
that.
I think the sign would. If you, I mean, if you're buying a sign, they have pretty detailed spec sheets.
The
It'll
vendor.
tell you exactly what its light range is.
Can I ask you a little bit about the history here? This was voted down for
Well,
many reasons, and then a sign came out and it got pushed through. What happened?
So what happened under the ZBA is one of the gas stations on Northampton Street requested a sign like this. The building inspector looked at it and said, this is not a permitted sign. They said, we're appealing to the ZBA. They went to the ZBA, they appealed the decision. The ZBA ruled in their favor and said, we do not believe this is an electronic messaging sign. We believe this is what is defined as
Changeable sign.
a changeable sign, which I will note is not used anywhere else in the ordinance at all. So there's this is one small issue in this ordinance, and I'm almost done with my inconsistency review, and it's I know there was a lot of work that went into it, but it's mind-boggling how confusing and disorganized the regulations are in terms of the enforcement side. I mean, you guys passed it, and now we're the enforcers and we're the ones who have to interpret it, and we can't even agree within our offices.
So do you think this, and I don't want to coin the wrong phrase here, but just in case, kind of loophole sort of thing, and that might be dangerous. Do you think that this is, with that phrase that you just mentioned, appropriate in this loophole? I mean, I'm just asking you, Jessica.
I mean, it will.
What phrase do you mean?
Well,
It's going to address this specific situation, but I guess my concerns at this point are where this fits in the organization of the sign ordinance, because it's such a disaster in
Right.
terms of how it's organized. And I sort of agree with Harry in terms of the enforcement side, and foot candles is a very standard measurement for all types of lights, not just LED, but so I wonder if in future versions of this, which I hope we'll get to at some point in the near future, that we have specifically a section that just talks about illumination,
Right.
that applies for
All
everything.
signs.
All signs, and that there's a standard foot candle that's applied to all signs, not just the LEDs. So, I mean, I think we've got, from a process standpoint, we've got two things going on. We had this decision that came down from the ZBA that was appealed, went back and forth between the building inspector. Actually, the first decision that came from the ZBA is they said, we believe that this is a changeable sign and that it's permitted and that you can just go back and ask for it. So they went back to the building inspector and said, the ZBA said it's this, and he said, I still don't agree. And then they came back and appealed it again, and then they got this sign. So
Did something happen? They came back to the ZBA said the same thing
They
again.
basically said
and
the
went
same
back to
thing.
the building inspector
No,
again.
and then they said, we are granting this, and then it was granted. So this addresses this specific situation,
There's others that need to be
but
addressed.
there's other issues that need to be addressed. And so council already has on their agenda, under the ordinance, that you're looking at inconsistencies in the
Okay.
sign.
Yeah,
So
we
there's
left it on
already,
our agenda.
that process is already,
Okay.
what I'm just sort of worried about is that this gets adopted, it gets put in there, and then we go and rearrange the whole organization of the ordinance again. You know what I mean? And then maybe this stays in there, but it's not going to be under section L, it's gonna get moved to some other location in a more clear, succinct sort of way to
Right.
read the regs.
Which
So,
from my end, I think, you know, the reorganization, the eventual reorganization, I think, is good. I mean, we're gonna have to take everything that's in there now and reorganize it anyway. I wouldn't mind having this one thing that kind of clarifies things.
Okay.
And, you know,
Is there a reason, and I try to be knowledgeable about these things, but is there a reason this isn't a joint hearing with you and the ZBA?
because
We
that's
never
not
did.
how, that's
It's
not how,
just
that's not how
tossing
zoning
it out
happens.
there.
Yeah.
It seems that they were the authority on this, so I'm wondering why. Okay.
They could
So
certainly, they could
there's
certainly
a
speak
appeal.
to it if they wanted to, but honestly, the ZBA prefers to kind of stay out of
Okay.
things.
Well,
So,
I'd like to kind of get my team's opinion on this. My take on it is that it was ruled on as allowed, and these are a good set of guidelines, and my inclination is to approve. I'll start
Yeah,
with you, Harry.
absolutely.
Is that anything to add?
No, I just about we couldn't expand it, you know. But where it's right here right now, this is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes sense to have some guidelines.
Now, where are we at then in terms of this process? What do you want from the planning board here?
Well,
Is this to approve?
you need to approve, it's like any other zoning, so you need to approve it to move it forward so that they can take it to full council.
but,
Okay, and this is a what? This is an amendment to the sign ordinance?
yep.
It's an amendment to the sign ordinance.
So we would need a motion from the planning board to approve the proposed amendment to the sign ordinance
With the,
Do you want me to add, do you want me to have the
Recommended
additions
of
so we'll have to figure out wording. But,
sole.
I know,
purpose.
Soul's no problem, I got that. The 16 I have, is that okay with you guys? 16 is pretty standard.
I think we're okay.
If you look at the
Yeah,
one,
That's pretty short.
Yeah.
wait a minute, so you want to make it 16, not 12?
yeah, it's 16, not
Okay.
12, yeah. The one, if you go to Northampton on the right-hand side, across from the gas station thing, that is about 24 inches there, because there's a bigger. So, I mean, I'm
Wait a
fine
minute.
with,
I'm just kidding.
yeah.
Wait a minute.
I'm fine with changing the sign size. It just 16 seemed like a pretty standard one that was out there.
Are you all like 16 is what you want?
We've already
Yeah.
discussed it.
Yeah. So, so that was one other thing, and then for the illumination, we can add that they should supply, or they must supply. I'm not exactly sure how it should be worded within an ordinance to ask them to supply. So, like, they would have to supply.
Independent verification of foot candles must be provided at installation.
Right, but which maybe I don't know if we need to say independent, because the manufacturer will probably be the one providing it. It's like when you buy a sign, you spend $8,000 on it, they're going to give you a little thing that says exactly what the foot candles of that, in the specifications.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm fine to trust the specifications and not necessarily make them go get somebody to shoot what the heck is it called? a candelabra?
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. I mean,
I think the only potential problem with that is, like, I don't know how these signs work, maybe you have done more research on this, but if the specs say, like, oh, this goes up to, like, 3 million
Right.
foot
Candles.
candles,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you can adjust it,
Right.
then there's no way to say, well, this has the potential to go over the limit, but they're saying that they're going to limit it to
Yeah,
our regulations.
Right.
It's a very good point. It's a difficult.
Well, I
it's
think
somewhat
I
prohibiting
think part
powerful.
of the nature of the sign kind of helps prevent that scenario, because if you have it up above 0.8, then it becomes so bright that it blurs the image, that it's trying to. So that's
We're also
Defeats
limited.
the
it
purpose.
defeats the purpose, because it's so bright that you can't see what you're trying to.
Okay.
You
So
know.
it's a non-issue,
So
really.
I don't
We're
think
limiting
it's.
it to a black background, so it's not like it's a lit up background. It's a
Right.
black background with
And it's just
numbers.
numbers.
Just numbers.
Yeah.
just numbers. So, I mean, we can add that. I just don't know
Well,
exactly how to say it.
Based
Like-
on this discussion, it's starting to seem more and more relevant.
Yeah, I'm not really in favor of the independent verification or anything. It just, again, seems to be one of those
So,
prohibitive things.
do we want to say that they should provide the specifications of the sign to? Jessica, do you think that we would need to say that? Or do
I
you-
feel like he does it already, but you might as well, I guess.
Okay,
for
so
now.
And that's just to make sure that
Specifications-
$3 million in or whatever.
Have
Yeah.
you talked to the building
Yeah,
department
that's
about
all
this
it
at
is.
all? Have you run this language by them at all?
No.
I mean, it's, right now, we're kind of in a transition because Joe's out on medical leave
Right.
and we've got a temporary in place, but it might be worth checking in with him.
Seeing what he thinks.
And just seeing what he thinks, because he is the enforcer and he
Sure.
is the one who's granting the permits, and so you want to make sure that it works. I don't know whether they require the specs beforehand anyway. I know that they
Right.
require at least some mock-up
Yep.
of what the sign's gonna look like. I don't know whether the foot candles has ever been part of that before, so you
Okay.
might just wanna touch
I
base
can.
with him.
You don't happen to have his email?
I can give it to you afterwards, I don't.
I mean, I
You
think
can
our-
ask the mayor and she can give it to you,
Okay.
I don't think I even have it.
Okay.
I think our opinions are fairly set, but of course, I agree with Jessica,
Absolutely.
checking with, but so I don't know if we want to then motion to postpone until we get his report or approve on our end, but you know, if he comes back and says, what are you idiots thinking, I don't want to be the ones that approved it.
I mean, there's no rush on this, honestly. So.
Well, the other thing is just from a process, that the planning board's making a recommendation, it's really up to council on the
On the
final
final.
vote.
Okay.
So if worse
So
comes
it's
to
gonna be
worse, and
another
I know that this
stopgap
isn't
before-
protocol for
Okay.
council, but if you need to make an amendment on the floor of council, you
Right.
could do that,
We
right?
could. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be no problem. So, I mean, you guys can.
I think we should motion to approve, that's my
Okay.
recommendation.
So the language is, I motion to approve the proposed
Sign amendment,
LED sign
sign.
amendment to the East Hampton Sign Ordinance. Do I need to include the recommendations?
the only one we had was the addition of the word soul,
So, and changing 12 to 16.
and changing 12 to 16, with the,
And adding word B.
And well, these in the
and
new
B,
one.
yes.
Oh, okay.
With the
With the proposed amendments.
proposed amendments. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions? Let the record show there were none.
Okay, we can. I mean, we can move this forward too.
Absolutely.
And if there's any feedback we get from the building inspector, then we can amend it as we go. So.
So I make a motion to move to full council for consideration the service sign LED amendment as before us with the addition of Sol and changing 12 to 16.
Does that sound good?
All in favor?
Wow, well played.
Beautiful. All right.
Great
To
job.
move to adjourn. I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So,
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so our joint public hearing is closed,
It is.
and then we have